From the newsrooms of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, this is Please Explain. I'm Samantha Selinger-Morris. It's Tuesday, November 28th. It's now the fourth day of the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Dozens of hostages have been released from Gaza in exchange for the release of more than 100 imprisoned Palestinians in Israel. But what has their experience in captivity been like? How are they now? And does this extraordinary turn of events, the first pause in nearly 2 months of fighting, signal a greater change in the conflict? Today, national correspondent Matthew Knott on what loved ones of hostages have told him about their experiences and what might come next. Matt, over the last 4 days, we've seen the release of dozens of hostages, including a 4-year-old American girl, in exchange for more than 100 Palestinian women and teenagers during a temporary ceasefire. So can you tell us how this has unfolded?
Yeah, there was a lot of nervousness when this deal was initially announced. Obviously, there's such incredibly low trust between the two sides involved, Israel and Hamas. They're literally fighting a war against each other, but now they're having to cooperate on this complicated agreement. As we know, the deal is for 50 Israeli hostages to be released over 4 days. In exchange, there is a temporary ceasefire. 150 Palestinian prisoners will be released from Israeli jails. More aid, more food, more essential supplies are going into Gaza. But there's been a lot of doubt along the way about, how it will be implemented. We have seen some delays over various days in this being implemented, with both sides accusing the other of violating the details of the agreement. On Hamas's side, they've talked about whether enough aid trucks are coming in and whether the timing is all right in terms of the prisoner release. That said, it seems to be working out pretty well and it hasn't fallen apart. The deal is holding, and Israeli hostages are being released each day. Palestinian prisoners are being released. So in the middle of a terrible and gruesome war, this has been a good thing overall. I think most people would agree.
And you've kept in touch with Israeli families since your travels in the region a few weeks ago, including the family of Yaffa Adar, an 85-year-old grandmother whose kidnapping was videoed and shared widely on social media at the time. You've spoken to her granddaughter after Yaffa was released on Saturday morning. So can you tell me about Yaffa's experience in captivity?
Yes, while we were there in Israel last month, we did a story on the hostages. This was only the week or so after the October 7 massacre. The hostage families were really trying to get more attention for their family members. There was a lot of focus on the war. There was a lot of focus on the massacre itself, but they felt like their family members were being ignored, including by the Israeli government. They didn't feel they were being given enough priority. So they were very keen to speak to international media as well as local media, because they saw that the hostages would become part of the international diplomacy around this issue. And one of the first people we met was Yaffa Adar, who's 32 years old. First of all, can I get your full name?
Yes, it's Adva. It's A-D-V-A. Adar. It's A-D-A-R.
And she was speaking about her grandmother, Yaffa, who is 85 and who lived in a kibbutz, a small farming community near the Gaza border. And you could just tell, speaking to her, the huge amount of love that Adva had for her grandmother.
She was very young-minded, so she liked to, she was in Facebook.
Okay.
And she liked to post things.
Yeah.
And send, gifts and
oh, wow.
stickers in WhatsApp. She was very cool.
She described her grandmother as someone who really believed in peace with the Palestinian neighbors who were only on the other side of the border fence.
Really believing about wanting to live peacefully in there, really believing that we should have a happy ending with our neighbors. That, they were the ones.
She was incredibly worried about the prospects for her because of her advanced age. She doesn't walk very well. She takes daily medication, and Adva had no idea whether she would ever be able to see her grandmother again, be able to hug her. And This video of Yaffa went viral very early on after the massacre because she was being driven around in a golf cart in Gaza by her captors, and she had almost a smile on her face. She looked very peaceful, and some people thought, oh, maybe this old woman has dementia or Alzheimer's disease, and that offended Adva and the other members of the family.
Because, that's my grandmother, and of course, she's sharp. She's sharp-minded, and she gets everything, but she's the kind of person that she will sit there and she will look them in the eyes and she will, let them see that she's a person and they can kidnap her, but they won't take her pride and they won't humiliate her and she won't let them see her suffer or afraid.
Hello everyone. Thankfully, our grandmother returned home yesterday. After almost 50 days in captivity, we got a chance to hug her again. We are very moved from her strength and from the way she was able to survive this experience.
So I was very, very happy given we'd met Adva and heard her story, and the family is absolutely delighted that she is back. There's been an education process here because the hostages clearly didn't have much information while they were in captivity. She didn't know that many of her neighbors had been killed or taken hostage themselves. One of her other grandchildren, so this would be Adva's cousin, is a young man and he's still being held captive. So these are the type of things that the hostages are now learning.
I want to say that the fight is not over until all of the hostages will be back.
Then there's the mixed feelings because Adva's cousin is still being held hostage. All the other hostages are still there, and they say they won't give up their campaign until all the hostages have come home.
We will fight for all of them. We will demand their return. Please continue the pressure and make sure that Hamas will understand that we won't accept any other option but bringing them all back home. Thank you.
And what do we know about Yaffa Adar's time in captivity? I know she spent 49 days being held captive, and of course, she's 85. Do we know anything about what her experience was like?
It's interesting in the way this is being managed. It's clear that the Israeli government doesn't seem to want the hostages themselves to speak. Now, Israel is a democratic society. I assume at some point these people will speak, but I think it's seen as very delicate, all this information in terms of the future negotiations. So the family members are speaking and saying, we're happy to have them back. We're hearing some details about what they were eating. It sounds pretty basic, which isn't necessarily very surprising given the terrible situation in Gaza, but that they're eating rice and pita bread. Most of those who have been released seem to be in pretty good health. I think we'll know more, but it's still seen as high stakes in terms of there still being so many more people to be released.
And what do we know about the other hostages who have been released from Gaza during the ceasefire?
So the overwhelming number of these hostages are women and young children, some very young. Today, on Monday, a young 4-year-old girl was set free, and she's an orphan. Her parents died in the massacre, and she's being reunited with her siblings who were hiding during the attacks. Among those released in the third and latest group of hostages are the family members of a man we met near Tel Aviv. He was staying in a hotel set up for the family members of people who had to flee the kibbutz where he lived. His name was Avichai. His wife and 3 young children were taken hostage, and he described to us he was a very apolitical man. He was just kind of an ordinary guy. But then this terrible day happened and his wife and children were taken hostage, so he felt like he had to do something, and he went and started protesting outside the defense ministry in Tel Aviv, and that has now become a focal point for the protest movement for the hostage families. So they're being reunited. We've also seen some of the international hostages released, particularly the Thai agricultural workers. There was a group of 10 early on, and we've seen another 3 Thais released in the latest group. All the men who were taken hostage still remain in captivity, as well as the Israeli soldiers who were taken captive.
And Matt, do we know how many people are still being kept hostage by Hamas and where they're being held captive?
Yeah, so it's about 210 people remaining. We obviously don't know exactly how many are still alive, but no, we don't know where they are. The assumption is that many will be kept in this tunnel network that Hamas has, which would explain why these people have survived the bombing, but that's also extremely secretive, as you can imagine.
Matt, over the last few days, we also saw the release of a significant number of Palestinian prisoners in exchange for the hostages. Can you tell us anything about who those people are and what they had been imprisoned by the Israeli authorities for?
Yes, so as part of this deal, in exchange for the 50 hostages being released, we're expecting to see 150 Palestinian prisoners released that are held by Israel. They are all women or children. Some are boys who are 16, 17, 18. They haven't all been convicted, but they have been either charged or being held captive on charges such as they can range from simply throwing stones, relatively low level, to more serious charges such as terrorism, stabbings, arson. But there's a lot of celebration from the family members, just the same as with the hostages. They can wait for a long time without trial. It works differently than it would if they were Israeli citizens. And this is a big achievement for Hamas. One of the reasons why they conducted this massacre in the first place was as a strategy to get people released from Israeli prisons. Now, the numbers here aren't as big as in the past. In the past, Israel exchanged 1,000 prisoners for one Israeli soldier. And among the prisoners that they released then was the man who's gone on to become the leader of Hamas in Gaza. So there's more wariness now from Israel about releasing such big numbers of hostages, but they know they have to do this or they won't get their hostages back.
And these last 4 days have constituted the first pause in almost 2 months of fighting, in which Gaza has been under significant bombardment, resulting in thousands of lives lost. So was this short reprieve long enough to supply Gazans with the critical humanitarian aid they need?
Certainly not enough, but everyone really has welcomed this because not enough aid was getting through into Gaza. The very basics of life weren't getting through. So this does seem to have improved the situation a bit. I imagine it would keep improving as you get more momentum over coming days, if it is possible to extend this ceasefire. The lull in the fighting has given journalists, particularly more time to access some of the areas in northern Gaza without fear of being bombed. We knew that it was bad, but what we're seeing is pretty devastating in terms of the destruction of Gaza City. Whole blocks completely just turned into rubble. So we're getting an idea of how devastating the war has been already for the people of Gaza. And while this pause may be extended by a few days, we're not sure, the Israeli government, the military, has said that they are going to continue the war very soon.
And as you've just referred to, the Israeli government has said that it will extend the ceasefire by a day for each additional 10 hostages released. So do you think this is something that we can expect to see?
I think both sides want it. Hamas particularly seems to want it. They feel like this is a good deal for them. The worry on the Israeli side has been that each day is more of a chance for them to regroup militarily. But this is the price you have to pay to get the hostages back. But yes, Hamas has said they want to see it extended. Israel included this condition for a reason, that they wanted to incentivize this to work, really. So I think it is possible, but it does come down to negotiations. That they want to see 10 hostages released for each day. You could imagine many ways where this could break down and the fighting quickly resumes. But I think there is the desire on both sides there to get more hostages out.
And do you think that this temporary pause has been a sign of change? Perhaps a longer, if not final, ceasefire in this round of conflict in the near future?
It's certainly a breather. Israel certainly publicly is saying that they're sticking with their goals for this war. Now, one of them was to secure the release of the hostages, but the main overriding aim has been to the various terms are used. Is it destroy Hamas, to cripple Hamas's military and governing capabilities, to install a new governing regime in Gaza. They're very ambitious aims, they're very costly aims, but Israel is still committed to them, and that will require perhaps months more fighting. The fighting could go well into early next year. Could also include more pauses like we've seen now to get more hostages released in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. But it is a bit of a breather, and you do wonder how the Israeli generals have been sitting back and thinking about the campaign that's gone so far and where it will go from here. Will there be a way to achieve some of their aims in terms of taking out Hamas's leadership with fewer civilian deaths? It'd be interesting to see how they've used this little lull to perhaps alter their strategy and perhaps develop a plan for how to win this war in some way and what happens after the war, because we haven't received a lot of detail about what victory really looks like for Israel here.
Matt, we are so lucky to have your insights, so thank you so much for joining us.
No worries at all.
Today's episode of Please Explain was produced by Tammy Mills, with technical assistance by Chi Wong. Our executive producer is Ruby Schwartz. Please Explain is a production of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. If you enjoy the show and want more of our journalism, subscribe to our newspapers today. It's the best way to support what we do. Search The Age or smh.com.au/subscribe. I'm Samantha Selinger Morris. This is Please Explain. Thanks for listening.